So we're going to look at interest over years to begin with. Now, when I say over years, basically, I want the reality of the situation is this. If you're going to put your money away, you tend to want to put it away for long periods of time. And when you put it away for long periods of time, you tend to what's called compound interest more than one time. So maybe after 1 year it makes 5%. After the second year it makes 5% again. And after the third year it makes 5% again, and so on and so forth. So that's the reality of any type of interest. That's usually what's happening. So we're going to start with the basic assumptions that we want yearly interest rates. Okay, so anything that we do is going to be a yearly idea. And we're also going to say, we're going to assume for the sake of argument, that I get a constant percentage every single year. So there are, in reality, situations where the percentage might 1 year be 6% and the next year might be 8% and so on and so forth. But we're going to assume for the sake of this section that we have a yearly compounding interest rate and we get a constant percentage of interest every year. Alright, so we're going to start with $4,000 in an account. And we want it to gain 4% interest every year. So the question is, how much will there be after 3 years? How much will be in the account? Now, again, gaining 4% means I would have taken the $4,000. That's like year 0. And after year 1, since it would again gained 4%, again, we're just typing this into your calculator. Gaining 4% is like having 104% of your original. We'd have 4,160 after year 1. Now, here's the real trick. So we see that we gain $160 in year 1. Year 2, we will not gain $160. Because in year 2, I don't start with $4,000 again. In year 2, I start out with the $4,160. And so at the end of year 1, I have $4,160. That's my starting amount at the beginning of year 2. So again, take 104% of the $4,160. Now I get $4,326.40. That's at the end of year 2. So I gained not 160, but actually $166.40 that year. And basically where that's coming from, where that extra few dollars is coming from, is that this $160 now is compounding interest too. Whereas in year 1 we only started with $4,000. This extra $160 that I have from my gained interest is compounding in year 2. And so for the last year, what we're going to do is we're going to take the 43, 26, 40, take 104% of that, and I will get almost 45,000. No, excuse me, 4,500. I'll get $4,499.46 if I round it after the end of year 3. All right. So basically what you see there happening is that each iteration of the new year, you're multiplying by a new 104%. Now that observation is useful when you talk about not 3 years, but what happens over 15 years. Because you don't actually want to take and every single time for 15 years do my multiplication. We want an easy way to do this. So what we're going to do is say, okay, if $4,000 is annually, what we noticed is that each year that we gain interest, we gain 4%. So I could take 1.04 times 4,000, and then in the second year, gain another 4%. So that's another multiply by 1.04. And in the third year, gain 1.04%. And you can see where I'm going with this. So you're going to do a bunch of multiplications by 1.04. Well, how many are you going to do? Well, since we're talking about 15 years, we're going to do 15 multiplications. And a better way to write that is to take $4,000 times 1.04. I put this in parentheses, to the 15th power. So again, this is exponent of 15. And if you remember your basic operations of math, remember when you put this in, order of operations says do the exponent first, and simplify the parentheses, do the exponent first, and then multiply. So in this case, by the way, in most of your calculators, you can write this in as one single line. But if I wait for 15 years, how much am I going to have in the account? Well, I'm going to have $7,203.77. Again, that's after 15 years. So what we see here is that if we're doing this yearly, now that's, by the way, remember that's a huge assumption that we're talking about yearly. What I have to do is I have to just take my amount that's going to be in the account after some observation numbered of years is going to be my principal. By the way, principal here just means starting amount. So the P just means the amount you start with. Times 1 plus R. Now that R is obviously my rate, my interest rate. And then the exponent is going to be how many years that you leave the amount in the whatever kind of account it is. All right? So the final amount is going to be your principal times 1 plus rate to the exponents of years. So, I want you guys to try this on your own. Use the formula. You start with $5,000 in an account, gain 8% interest yearly, and you're going to wait for 10 years on that. How much will you have in the account after that 10 years? Do this, and in a few seconds, again, push pause on the video. In a few seconds, I'll come back and explain. Alright, so hopefully you push pause. The idea here is we start with 5,000, that's our principal. 8%, that's 1 plus 0.08. I'm just going to write it as 1.08. And I want to do that for 10 years. So type that into your calculator. In fact, if you have the right calculator, the TI-32X, or if you have something like an 83 or an 84, then this should all go in one line. And you'll see that if you have 8% interest compounded yearly, and if you put the $5,000 into an account, after 10 years, you are going to have $10,794 and 62 cents. And that's it. So I want you to just be clear of that. By the way, there's two types of questions you can ask. This is the final amount that you have in the account. If you wanted to ask about how much interest you gained, then the interest you gained is the difference between your final amount and your principal. In other words, we started with $5,000. Of this $10,794, we started with $5,000 of it. Okay? So the amount of interest we gained is the difference between my principal and my final amount. If we're talking about interest in this case, the interest I gained was $5,794.62. Okay, so just be really careful about what the question asks. Does it ask how much is in the account after 10 years, or how much interest did you gain after 10 years?